After 3 long deployments, I got a message from my wife. Don't bother coming back. I changed the locks. The kids don't want you. I replied with 3 words, as you wish. One call to my lawyer changed everything. Soon her lawyer was the one begging. The message came in at 2:14 p.m., 31,000 feet over the Atlantic. I was still in uniform. 3 deployments, 36 months total. The kind of time that doesn't move like regular time. It compresses and expands in ways that are difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it. Whole weeks collapsing into nothing, and then a single hour stretching out like a road with no end. I had spent that time doing work I believed in and missing my children with a specific physical ache that I carried in my chest like a second set of ribs. I read the message twice. Don't bother coming back. I changed the locks. The kids know the truth about you. It's over. My lawyer will be in touch. Around me on the transport, other soldiers were already on their phones. I could see it happening in my peripheral, the particular brightness in people's faces when they call home, the way a person's whole posture changes when they hear a voice they've been missing. A corporal, 2 rows ahead of me, was already crying, the good kind, face turned toward the window. I sat with my phone in my hand and looked at the message. The thing about being a soldier is that you learn to read terrain before you move. You learn that the worst mistakes are made by people who react before they've assessed. You learn that the difference between a good outcome and a bad one is almost always preparation, what you did before the situation arrived, not what you improvise after. I had spent 36 months deploying and redeploying, and I had spent the months before each one doing something my wife had laughed at, preparing. I typed back 3 words, as you wish. She thought that was surrender. She had no idea it was the opening move. I need to tell you about my grandfather, because without him, none of what follows makes sense. Retired federal judge Harold Holloway served on the federal bench for 22 years before his retirement. He is 81 years old and speaks in the precise, measured cadences of a man who spent 2 decades ensuring that every word he said carried exactly the weight he intended and not 1 ounce more. He taught me to play chess when I was 7. He taught me to read a contract before I signed it when I was 12. He taught me something about war when I was 26, standing in his kitchen the night before my first deployment, drinking coffee at a table where 3 generations of Holloways had made decisions. He said, war changes the people who stay home just as much as the people who go, Marcus, sometimes more, because the people who go understand what they're doing and why. The people who stay are just waiting, and waiting changes people in ways they don't always see in themselves. He put his coffee down. Protect yourself on paper before you go. Every time. No exceptions. I took that seriously. I took it more seriously than my wife, her name is Vanessa, understood when I sat her down before my first deployment and walked her through what I had done. The house, purchased with my VA loan 18 months before the marriage, deed in my name only. She had been aware of this when we married. She had signed documents acknowledging the existing deed structure. I had an attorney explain this to her. She had nodded and smiled and moved on. The emergency guardianship paperwork. In the event I was killed or incapacitated and Vanessa was subsequently found unfit, my grandfather was named legal guardian of our 2 children, Jalen, then 5, and Amara, then 3. I had had a conversation with Vanessa about this. She had called it morbid and said I was borrowing trouble and barely looked at the notarized forms before she signed them. The financial documentation. Every wire transfer I sent home from deployment was logged and retained. Amount, date, source account, destination account. I sent home $3,400 a month for 3 deployments, a total of $122,400 over 36 months, which I had documented with the thoroughness of someone who understood that documentation is the only kind of proof that survives. The communication records, every video call, every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, every holiday, every birthday, every middle of the night call when one of the kids was sick and Vanessa's stress bled through the screen, logged with timestamps, every letter saved, every email preserved in a dedicated folder that I backed up to 3 separate cloud accounts. Vanessa had laughed when I asked her to sign the pre-deployment paperwork the first time. You're so paranoid, Marcus. Nothing is going to happen. She wasn't wrong about the paranoia, exactly. She was just wrong about its purpose. I want to be honest about Vanessa, because she deserves accuracy rather than caricature. We had been good together once. I don't say that to soften what she did. I say it because it's true, and because the complicated truth is more useful than the simple version. She was smart, genuinely funny, a devoted mother in the early years, the kind of person who made a room feel warmer when she walked into it. We had built something real together before the deployment started accumulating, before the distance became its own kind of weight, before the loneliness of being a military spouse began to compound into something that changed her in the way my grandfather had warned me it might. The change was gradual. I noticed it on the video calls, a distance in her voice, a performance quality to the updates about the kids, a way of answering my questions that was technically responsive and somehow entirely withheld. I noticed that her call to complain about household logistics became more frequent, and her calls to just talk became rarer and eventually stopped. I noticed the first deployment that she mentioned a man named Craig from her spin class, mentioned him once, casually, too casually, in the way people mention things they've been thinking about and have decided to normalize in advance. I didn't confront her. I didn't have the evidence, and I didn't have the time, and I understood, from my grandfather's advice and from my own developing understanding of my situation, that confrontation was the least efficient response to what I was observing. What I did was document. Before the third deployment, I called my military attorney, Derek Wainwright, 8 years practicing JAG law, now in private practice specializing in military family matters, recommended to me by a colleague who had been through a similar situation and come out the other side intact. Derek and I had a 2-hour call. I walked him through everything: the deed structure, the guardianship paperwork, the financial documentation, the communication logs. He reviewed what I had and identified what was missing, and we spent the following 3 weeks closing the gaps. Marcus, he said at the end of our last call before I shipped out, if she files while you're deployed, she is going to have a very bad time. I know, I said. She has no idea. I know, I said. My phone rang 6 hours after the message, somewhere over the mid-Atlantic. Derek's name on the screen. She filed yesterday, he said, without preamble. Divorce petition claiming abandonment. She's asking for full custody, spousal support, and she's listed the house as a marital asset. I felt nothing particularly dramatic when he said this. Not rage, not grief, something more functional. The specific mental state of someone who has been briefed on the enemy's position and is now calculating the response. My grandfather's voice in my head. You can't be ambushed if you built the terrain. Derek, I said, execute the contingency plan. All of it. A brief pause. She has no idea what she just started, he said. I know, I said. Let's keep it that way until tonight. We landed at Fort Stewart at 5:47 p.m. The jetway was the specific sensory overload of every military homecoming. The noise, the heat, the smell of Georgia in July, families pressing toward the exit like a tide, children running and being caught, the particular sound of reunions happening all around you that is the best and worst sound in the world, depending on which side of it you're on. I was in my dress uniform, service ribbons, 3 deployment patches, the visible record of 36 months. I had my duffel on my shoulder and my phone in my hand, and I stood in the middle of the flow of people moving around me, and I called Derek. Are we ready? Process server confirmed, court officers confirmed, paperwork filed and executed. What time do you want to arrive? I looked at the clock on my phone. 7 p.m. would give me enough time to drive to the house, give Vanessa enough time to have come home from wherever she'd been all day, and arrive before she expected anything. 7, I said. I'll meet you there. I got in the rental car that Derek had arranged. I drove 40 minutes through the Georgia evening with the windows down and the radio off, and the particular clarity of purpose that settles over you when everything has been decided and there is only the execution left. At 6:58 p.m., I parked one house down from the home I had purchased with my VA loan and owned in my name and had been locked out of by text message at 31,000 feet. Derek was at the curb, 2 court officers in plainclothes, a process server with a manila envelope. I stepped out of the car, still in uniform. Ready? Derek said. Yes, I said. We walked to the front door. Vanessa had been expecting her attorney. This is something I pieced together afterward from the timeline. She had called her lawyer in a panic when she saw my 3-word response, and he had told her to stay calm, that he would come by at 7 to review strategy, that she had the stronger position and shouldn't worry. She had spent the afternoon, apparently, in the kind of activated certainty that comes from making a decision you've convinced yourself is righteous. When I knocked on the door of my own house at 7:01 p.m., she opened it with the composed expression of someone expecting an ally. She found me, still in uniform. The composition lasted approximately 1 second before it fractured, not dramatically, not into tears, but into something more revealing, a rapid series of micro-expressions that moved across her face too fast for her to control. Surprise, calculation, the reset into a rehearsed version of the expression she had prepared. Marcus, her voice was steady. I gave her credit for that. You shouldn't be here. I've had the locks changed, I said. Yes, I got your message. The court officer stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Officer Terrence Webb with Chatham County. I'm here to oversee the execution of a property rights order. He read from the document in his hand, and I will not reproduce the full legal text because it is dense and specific, but the relevant portion was clear. Immediate restitution of the property to the rightful owner, as named in the property deed, Sergeant First Class Marcus J. Holloway, United States Army. Vanessa's face went white. This is my house, she said. The word my landed in a very specific way. No, I said quietly. It was always mine. She pivoted fast. I had expected this. Vanessa is not a slow thinker, and she understood in the seconds after the order was read that the terrain had shifted beneath her and that she needed a new strategy immediately. She launched into it with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed the abandonment narrative. The I did everything alone, the he chose the army over his family, the way the deployments had left her without support or partnership or any of the things a marriage is supposed to provide. Her voice had the particular quality of a prepared performance, emotional enough to sound genuine, controlled enough to stay coherent. Officer Webb cut her off. Ma'am, he said, not unkindly. Not unkindly at all. The property deed has one name on it. Preventing the owner's access constitutes criminal trespass. You need to step back and allow Sergeant Holloway to enter his home. The performance collapsed, not into crying, into a stillness that was was more revealing than crying would have been. The stillness of someone who has played the card they believed was their strongest and watched it fail to land. She stepped back. I walked into my house. The kids were at Vanessa's mother's house that evening. She had apparently arranged this before the conversation she had been expecting with her lawyer, which told me something about how thoroughly she had thought this through. Jalen was 9 now. Amara was 7. I had last seen them in person 11 months ago, and I had talked to them on video every Sunday at 7 o'clock, and I had sent them letters that I was told they kept in a shoebox under Jalen's bed, and I did not know what Vanessa had told them about me in the months since the calls had grown shorter and more strained. I walked through the house that night after the officers had gone, after Derek had confirmed next steps and left me with his card and a thorough summary of where things stood, and I did the specific thing that returning soldiers do. I relearned a space, the height of the ceiling, the way the kitchen light hits the table in the evening, the smell of the place, which was the same and different, domestic and unfamiliar all at once. Jalen's drawings were still on the refrigerator. I stood in front of them for a while. The preliminary hearing was scheduled 10 days after my return. Derek had filed our response to Vanessa's divorce petition within 48 hours of my landing, and the response was, in Derek's measured professional assessment, comprehensive. What this meant in practice was that every claim in Vanessa's petition had been anticipated, and the documentation to refute each one had been assembled, labeled, and organized into a filing that the clerk had apparently looked at with visible surprise. Judge Patricia Simmons, 27 years on the family court bench, with the reputation of someone who has seen every tactic and is not impressed by any of them, read the filing before the hearing. Vanessa's attorney, a man named Harrison, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to winning on procedural grounds, entered the preliminary hearing with the posture of a man who believes he is in a strong position. He was not in a strong position. Judge Simmons opened by addressing the abandonment claim. "Counsel," she said, looking at Harrison over her reading glasses, "your client has filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. Would you like to explain to this court how a decorated soldier serving 3 consecutive deployments on active duty constitutes abandonment?" Harrison began to explain. He used the word constructive several times. Judge Simmons did not appear moved. "Sergeant Holloway," she said, turning to me, "you were on active duty for the entirety of the period your wife has characterized as abandonment. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You were required to deploy." "Yes, Your Honor." "You were not, to your knowledge, at liberty to simply decide not to." "That is correct, Your Honor." She looked back at Harrison. "That is not abandonment. That is the fulfillment of a sworn obligation to the United States Army. Let's move to the financial claims." Derek placed the financial documentation on the table. 36 months of wire transfers, everyone logged, totaling $122,400. Bank records showing receipt on Vanessa's end. Account statements showing expenditure patterns. A forensic accountant named Sandra Reeves, 14 years doing financial analysis for family court cases, had reviewed the records and prepared a summary that identified, among other things, $31,000 in expenditures during the 3rd deployment that Vanessa had not accounted for in her financial disclosures. Harrison had not been given advance notice of the forensic accounting report. His composure, which had been considerable, developed a visible crack at that point. Judge Simmons reviewed the property documentation, the deed, the VA loan origination, the date of purchase relative to the date of marriage. She reviewed the guardianship paperwork, the notarized forms naming my grandfather as emergency guardian, signed by Vanessa, demonstrating that she had never been the sole legal authority in the children's lives that she had claimed to be. She reviewed the communication logs, 156 video calls over 36 months, every birthday, every first day of school, every Sunday at 7 o'clock. She looked at Vanessa. "Your petition claims your husband made no meaningful effort to remain present in his children's lives during deployment," she said. The word claims landed with a specific weight. "I have before me a log of 156 video calls, every Sunday for 3 years, without exception. I have letters, dated and received. I have financial records showing consistent and substantial support." She set the document down. "What I don't have is any evidence supporting the characterization in your petition." Vanessa's posture had been changing incrementally through the hearing, the confident uprightness of the morning shifting towards something compressed, self-protective, the body responding to the room before the mind catches up. Then Judge Simmons said, "I'd also like to address the timing of your filing." She held up a printout of the text message, Vanessa's message. "Don't bother coming back. I changed the locks. The kids know the truth about you. It's over." This message was sent at 2:14 p.m. on the day of your husband's return flight, she said. 3 minutes, according to the flight records, before the plane was scheduled to land. After 3 deployments, 36 months of documented support and communication. She looked at Vanessa with the expression of someone who has formed a precise and unflattering assessment. "Sending that message 3 minutes before your husband's wheels touch down does not demonstrate stability or sound judgment in a co-parent." Harrison opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," Judge Simmons said. She wasn't. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, the house remained mine, as it had always been. Alimony denied, given the financial records and the the unexplained expenditures, the request was not supportable. Provisional joint custody, with the specific notation that the court would be evaluating the kids, know the truth about you characterization in the text message for potential parental alienation implications. A mandatory psychological evaluation for Vanessa before any permanent custody arrangement could be finalized. Immediate unrestricted access for me. I could pick up my children that afternoon. Harrison requested a recess to confer with his client. I looked across the table at Vanessa while Harrison murmured in her ear. She was looking at the table. Jalen and Amara were at Vanessa's mother's house, which was 15 minutes from the courthouse. Derek drove me there. I want to tell you about those 15 minutes because they were the most important of the entire day. More important than the hearing, more important than the property order, more important than any of the legal architecture that had held. I sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window at the Georgia streets going past, and I thought about my son's drawings on the refrigerator and my daughter's voice on the video calls. The way she had started calling me Daddy Marcus sometime in the second deployment, like the distance required a more formal address, and the way I had laughed and said just Daddy is fine, baby, every time, and the way she kept doing it anyway, her small private joke. I thought about what Vanessa had told them, the truth she had referenced in the text. I thought about 11 months of not holding them. My hands were still in my lap when Derek pulled into Vanessa's mother's driveway. I noticed they were not shaking. That surprised me a little. I knocked on the door. Vanessa's mother, Carol, opened it. She is a quiet woman who has always been kind to me with the careful, diplomatic kindness of someone navigating between a daughter she loves and a truth she can see but hasn't named. She looked at me in the doorway in my uniform, and her face did something complicated. "They're in the backyard," she said. I walked through the house. The backyard was small and green, an oak tree in the corner, a swing set that I recognized from the video calls. Jalen was sitting on the grass reading something. Amara was on the swing, pumping her legs, going higher than was probably prudent. Amara saw me first. She stopped pumping. The swing slowed. She looked at me with the particular expression of a child who is processing something that is too large for a single expression. "Daddy?" she said. "Not Daddy Marcus, just Daddy." Jalen looked up from his book. I crossed the backyard. I don't have words for the next few minutes that are proportionate to what they were. They are mine. I am keeping them. What I will tell you is that when Amara wrapped her arms around my neck, small, fierce, the grip of a child who has not forgotten, I understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with property deeds or wire transfers or court orders, exactly what I had been protecting all along. Not an argument, not a case. Them. Harrison called Derek the next morning at 9:15 a.m. Derek relayed the call to me that afternoon, and his summary was precise. Harrison had used the word amicable 4 times in 2 minutes, which Derek said was the verbal equivalent of a white flag. We met in Derek's conference room 3 days later. Vanessa had surrendered her interest in the small property management business I had started before the first deployment, which she had been listed as a co-owner of, and which I had been managing remotely through a property manager named Walt for 3 years. She dropped every financial claim: alimony, asset division beyond what was legally required, the claim on the house. She signed a formal agreement committing to cease any communication with the children that characterized me as absent, neglectful, or in any way responsible for the divorce. She signed the parenting plan that Derek had drafted, which gave me equal custody time, equal decision-making authority, and a specific protocol for handling conflicts that had been reviewed and approved by a child psychologist named Dr. Marcus Webb, 12 years of family court consulting brought in by Derek, who had assessed the situation and identified, in clinical language, the dynamic Vanessa had created with the children as requiring correction before permanent arrangements were formalized. Vanessa's mandatory psychological evaluation was ongoing. She sat across the conference table from me while the last documents were signed, and she had the quality of someone who has been through something, not defeated exactly, but reduced. The specific reduction of someone who had built a plan on a foundation of assumptions and watched those assumptions fail in sequence. I looked at her when the last signature was done. "I never wanted to destroy you," I said. "I just refused to disappear." She looked at the table. Then she looked at me briefly with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not remorse, exactly. Something more complicated. The specific look of someone who understands, perhaps for the first time, that the person they underestimated had been paying attention the entire time. Her lawyer closed his folder. Neither of them said anything. My grandfather came to see me 2 weeks after the settlement. He is 81 and drives himself still, which his doctor has opinions about, and which he considers non-negotiable. He arrived at the house, my house, the one I had come home to, the one that is now also my children's home on the weeks they are with me, with a bottle of bourbon I was not going to be able to finish before it went bad, and a look on his face that I recognized from chess games 30 years ago. The look of a man who has seen the position play out exactly as he predicted, and is experiencing something between satisfaction and something older and quieter than satisfaction. We sat on the back porch. Jalen and Amara were inside, doing the Sunday evening ritual. Dinner, baths, the particular argument about which show to watch that has been reliably the same since the beginning of of time and will continue until they are old enough that the argument becomes something else. My grandfather poured 2 glasses and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Your grandmother and I were married 43 years. I know," I said. 43 years is a long time to do paperwork, he said. But I always did it. Everything on paper. Everything documented. Because the law isn't about feelings, Marcus. The law is about what you can prove. He looked at the backyard. "You did it right," he said. Coming from a man of 22 years on the federal bench, that sentence carried a specific weight. "I had a good teacher," I said. We drank our bourbon. Inside, the argument about the show reached its usual inconclusive resolution. I could hear Amara's voice going up and Jalen's going down, and then the sound of the television, which meant someone had compromised, which meant both of them had grown slightly since the last time I had been here to witness it. I sat with my grandfather on my back porch, in the house I had built on paper before the first shot of the first deployment, and I listened to my children negotiate with each other in the ordinary, miraculous way of siblings, and I thought about 36 months, and wire transfers, and Sunday calls at 7 o'clock, and the text message at 31,000 feet, and 3 words that she had read as surrender. 3 words that were an opening move. The game was over. I had been playing it since before she knew we were playing.